There are many Bigfoot stories out there, but I promise you there are none more true than what I'm about to share with you. Listen to this. The Johnson twins, born in Madison County, Alabama, 1961, twin brothers, both born into poverty. How do I know? Because I was right there along with them. At 9 years old, we would run around in the woods playing soldiers, shooting at each other with sticks, throwing rocks for grenades, and back in those days is when they received their nicknames, Chicken Man and Boom. The oldest brother, by 30 minutes, was called Chicken Man because he ran like a chicken. The other brother got the nickname Boom from his father because he had a way of making explode. I remember those days, the three of us playing as little boys, rolling into our teenage years, girls, booze, guns. When high school rolled around, both of them decided they were going to the military, and I decided to take my shot at college. And it was at this point, our senior year in high school, where we lost contact. Sure, when I was at home on break, I would visit their mother, Miss May, and check on her. She would give me updates on them and their life. They had been recruited to special forces and had been traveling in the world, fighting for their country. And while they were all fighting, I was getting my law degree at the University of Georgia. Listen, 1987 was the first time I ran into them again. I was home visiting my parents and saw them sitting outside on their mama's porch. And you know how it is when you run into old childhood friends, talking to them bring back memories. But soon those memories began to fade away as I realized that these two men were no longer the little boys that I played in the woods with. They had changed. You could see it in their eyes. Something was broken in both of them. The only thing that remained the same was that as a little boy, Boom had a habit of stuttering his words. It had gotten better, but he still had a little bit of a stutter. I tell him, hey, let's head on out and get us some drinks. I'll cover the tab. Next thing you know, we're in Chattanooga, Tennessee at a titty bar having drinks. I'm filling them in on all the changes in my life and what I've been up to, and they're just sitting there listening. This one-way conversation goes on for about a solid 15 minutes when Chicken Man says, you know what? We could use ourselves a good lawyer. We want to buy some land. Can you help us with that? Now, as we're sitting there talking, I'm noticing things. These guys are in good shape. They're very handsome, and women are literally approaching them. But I noticed every time a woman approached Boom, he would turn his nose up at them and shoo them away. I made a mental note of it, only to find out later that Boom was gay. No big deal with me, but as a teenager, he showed no signs of being gay. Something had radically changed in him. They go on to tell me a story about when they were in special forces, that they ended up in Tehran after the Iranian Revolution, training U.S.-backed rebel forces that will eventually stand up against the Iranian government. Now, during that time, they helped the rebels organize and take advantage of the shortcomings of the new government. To skip around and make a long story short, them and a couple other members of their team returned to the U.S. with a vast amount of bearer bonds. Those bonds taken directly from the Iranian government. The issue that the two of them were having was that the laws were changing and they needed to do something with these bonds quickly, but had no clue how to proceed. Now, I didn't know anything about bonds, but when they told me how much they had, I figured within my circle of influence, I could find somebody who knew how to will and deal these bonds. So I agreed I would help them in exchange for 11% of the total value of the bonds. Took me about 2 weeks to actually figure out what the hell to do with them, and understand this, it was right around the time where they were about to pass the legislation to basically outlaw these particular bonds. Mainly, the reason was because they were anonymous. They didn't belong to any registered owner, just to whoever was bearing the bonds, hence the name. Listen, it took a lot of doing to get this done. I had to go through several banks in order to redeem the total amount of $15 million. And once that was done, we moved on to the acquisition of the property that they wanted. And God, listen to me, did these two dudes buy land? 150 acres around Bear Creek, 75 acres butted up against the National Forest in Oak Grove, Wilborn, 5 Points, you name it. If it was for sale in the tri-state area, they made an offer, cash, 20 to 30% below asking price, and people were taking those offers. Listen, when it was all said and done, they owned 4,400 acres across North Alabama. 1,000 acres in Texas, 1,500 acres in Louisiana, and 200 acres in Georgia. I had made my money. They had got what they wanted. Everything was going smooth, but went off the rails when they decided to start to build houses. And when I say it went off the rails extremely fast right there in Bear Creek, 1989. They had cleared 10 acres of land and were going to build their first home. Listen to me, I was invited out to the property to take a look, and man, it was amazing. Nestled along the northwest side, butted up against government property, it was the perfect sportsman's paradise home. Access to water, butted up against a national forest, so the game that was moving out of that forest would naturally transverse across your property. Listen, we are talking about a fantastic location, and everything is going fine until the Bigfoots started to acting funny. Now you may be saying to yourself, the word Bigfoot just rolled nonchalantly off his tongue like he grew up with Bigfoot. In actuality, we did. When we played around in the woods in Alabama, the Bigfoots were there as well. They didn't bother us. We didn't bother them. We knew not to get too close to them, or else we would have a problem. And if they started throwing rocks or sticks at us, we knew it was time to leave. So Bigfoots had not ever been a problem for any of us. But this particular clan over by Bear Creek were nothing like the Bigfoots we grew up around. And from the day the twins started building, those Bigfoots gave them hell. Now listen to me before I go any further in the story. I can only tell you what I know because I was only there at certain parts in time. But what I'm relaying to you is what they relayed to me. The very first day they started laying the foundation was the first time the Bigfoots came in mass. Listen, I'm not sure if it was the sound of the concrete truck setting them off or just the noise, but they started throwing rocks and tree branches from the wood line, eventually bringing construction to a complete halt. The next morning, they went back to work and nothing happened. Over the next couple of days, they continued to work and everything was quiet. But when the framing began, hammers driving nails into wood, making noise, the workers would complete a section of the house, come back the next day, and find it completely torn down, lumber flung all over the place. And it was at this point in time that Chicken Man and Boom decided to move a trailer in, spend the night there to protect their investment. The first night, they hear something walking around the trailer, just circling them, but it didn't touch anything. And over the next few days, the men were able to get the walls framed, and they started to frame the roof. The very night they got the roof framed, things started to get aggressive, and the Bigfoots began to be more violent, shaking the trailer, rocking it back and forth, tossing them to and fro, throwing them around like glitter inside of a snow globe. Now, according to Boom, this went on for a solid 35 minutes, long enough for the two of them to lose their patience with the Bigfoots. They headed outside armed with mini 14 rifles, shining lights into the tree lines. They could see sets of green eyes shine everywhere, growling, grunting, trees shaking, going on all around them. And I quote Chicken Man's words, "We looked for the biggest, tallest, greenest eyes that we can find, and we let loose in that direction, firing and moving straight at it. The growling stopped, the trees stopped shaking, and the Bigfoots took off running." Now listen to this. The next morning, when the sun rises, the two of them start tracking. They find signs that 7 of those animals had been around their property. So when the workers arrive on site, the brothers come up with a plan. They tell the workers, listen, I need you guys to frame a floor in the ceiling that we can stand on. And I want you guys to close in a portion of the roof that would create a blind for us to hide in. We're going to leave the radio on and the TV on inside the trailer. And when the Bigfoots come, we're going to go ahead and deal with them and get it over with. Listen, by the end of that day, the workers have that section of roof completed. Temporary plywood put there, the area enclosed, holes cut into it, creating their own blind. That night, they leave the radio running inside the trailer while they hide in that section of roof and wait. Both of them have dozed off to sleep when they start to hear tree limbs snapping in the wood line. Next thing you know, the trailer is violently shaking. And guess what? Looking out, there are two male Bigfoots, 9 feet tall, on each side of the trailer, rocking it like a kid's toy. Boom takes aim and fires, shooting one in the back of the head and the other one directly through the eye. These two giants literally stumble around trying to run for the tree line but fall to the ground. And then they wait and wait and wait until other Bigfoots come out of the woods trying to drag those bodies away, and they fill them up with lead as well. Listen to me. According to Boom, as the Bigfoot bodies began to stack up in that spot, the rest of them ran off into the woods. Well, listen, when I tell you Chicken and Boom weren't the people to mess with, and these Bigfoots learned the hard way, they learned the hard way. Because that morning at 2 a.m., they built a gigantic fire and started to burn the bodies. The only thing left of the bodies were bones. They took those bones, broke them up, put them in the boxes. Now, they told me originally their plan was to take the bones off and bury them, right? But somehow, some way, they get a visit from a man. The very next morning, I'm talking about, you can still smell the smoke. A man pulls up in an SUV and tells the two brothers that he's aware of what they're going through and what they're doing, and he's going to have to confiscate the bones. Listen to me when I tell you this. This man knows their entire military record. He knows about the bearer bonds. He knows everything about them. He threatens Chicken Man and Boom, telling them that they needed to leave the Bigfoots alone or else he would be back. But again, Chicken Man and Boom were not the two men to be trifled with. So they allow him to take the bones, and that very same day, they go around the woods and start laying traps for the Bigfoots. And this is exactly what they did. Went out and gathered as much meat as possible. They took that meat and hung it in the trees around the property. Listen, and when I say meat, I'm not talking about supermarket bought meat. We talking about hog legs, entrails, you name it, it was out there in them woods. Again, that night, they stayed in the small section of the roof, but all they could hear was this painful moaning and groaning coming from deep in the woods. They spent the next 3 nights in that blind, waiting to see if there would be any more activity. But there wasn't. So finally, they got back to work and completed construction. And with that Bigfoot problem gone, they moved on to build the next house and the next house and the next house. Since then, they've built over 250 rural homes. And I know for a fact they've encountered all kinds of strange things building houses in the middle of nowhere. But nothing, and I mean nothing, stops these two men.